Hello, family, and welcome to another episode of Role Model Experts Cafe. I'm your host, Dr. L, the Parent Whisperer. Today, with me, I have an amazing lady. I've had an opportunity to speak with her. I love how she shows up. Did I do a podcast with you, Lindsay? Did we
Not
do that?
yet. We
Not
haven't done
yet.
a podcast
That's
yet.
that's to be coming soon. Coming soon. All right. So her name is Lindsay Miller. She's amazing. I love how she shows up, and I love the audience that she serves. So, without further ado, welcome to our show today, Lindsay. And thank you, audience, for tuning in and watching our session today. Lindsay, tell us a little bit about yourself, your passion, why you do what you do. We'll go from there.
Okay, thanks. And I appreciate you having me, Dr. L. This is such a pleasure. I'm grateful to connect with your audience, and I really appreciate the work that you do.
Thank you.
My work is with children in regards to mindfulness. So, one of the things I feel passionate about is teaching children the skills of mindfulness when they're young so that they can build their life on this foundation of resilience. Mindfulness gives us a lot of different ways to adapt and be flexible to any challenges that come our way. And as adults, this is a skill that a lot of us are trying to pick up. And I know as I myself cultivated more and more of the tools of mindfulness, I started to think back to all the moments in my childhood when these would have come in really handy. And so I started to teach it to my daughter. I started to teach it to other kids. I had friends approach me about teaching their kids. And the way that I approach it with kids is in just a really playful, story-like way. And so it's easy to integrate it into kind of just family conversation and family culture. So the more and more people that I talked to, the more and more I started to see that this really had a big impact. And it was a simple thing with a big impact, which as parents, we are always looking for those kind of hacks, right?
Right. Exactly. So why is the mindfulness a thing? I know that like in our go lifestyle of constantly having to push and there's less and less time, we as parents oftentimes are like forgetting to do that ourselves, right? And inadvertently teaching that to our kids. But what do you see as far as kids are concerned when it comes to mindfulness?
That's a great question. One of the things that I see is like a receptivity to it. When kids are really little, they naturally are mindful. I was talking to a friend the other day who was saying how her son just wanted to play with the bottles. He had gotten into the drying rack for her bottles and he just wanted to play with the textures and make sounds with them. And little kids are really, really mindful. And a lot of the time, you're right, as adults in our fast paced life, we can pull them out of that mindful state, right? And so in parenting, like our children are usually when they're young, constantly inviting us to be more mindful, to see things with a beginner's mind, because that's how they're seeing the world, right? Everything for the first time. So as we can kind of stop and tune into their moments of discovering an acorn and the hat that it has, and they come apart and just the different textures of both. Those are things that little kids tend to just do naturally. And sometimes if we're not careful, we actually rush them through those mindful moments. And so as they get older in that like 8 to 13 age, they've kind of forgotten how to be mindful. They're in a rush or busy to do something with friends and we don't always kind of nurture that skill in them as they're growing up. So I like to focus on kids between 8 and 13 to help that mindfulness of childhood transition into those adolescent years and into adulthood so that it's not a skill they ever have to like reconnect with, but it's one that they can just consistently practice. And what that looks like with kids in that age range is starting to invite them into a little bit more just like abstract thinking. So we're talking about mindfulness in terms of like a thought river. Like, oh, it sounds like you have a lot of sadness floating down your thought river right now. Or it seems like you're feeling really angry about this. So we're helping them identify emotion and really know what to do with it. And that's the bridge into adolescence, right? Because when they're adolescents, they're going to be feeling those emotions with even more strength, right? And they're going to have a little bit more independence in terms of how they express them. So if we utilize that time from 8 to 13, when they're kind of in tune with their emotions and starting to understand what a feeling is or what to do with it, we can really leverage like the communication that they're open to at that stage to set us up for, stronger resilience once they hit adolescence.
That is amazing. Actually, one of the things you just hit on was that process of losing that wonderment and that being in the moment from the time we were kids to the time where we become adults. And it's interesting because one of the complaints that you often hear, especially during the teenage years and the adolescence, is children feeling disconnected, feeling alone. And what you just described, being mindful of your feelings and mindful of connecting within you, is the precursor to being able to connect to other people outside of you. So it's a perfect example of how what happens inside of you ultimately reflects on what happens outside. So naturally, this is something that we as adults sometimes have lost contact and connections with, right? So what are some of the challenges that you see both in the kids and in family life that gets in the way of people being mindful? And then ultimately, how can people overcome those challenges?
Yeah. And just to be clear, we all face them, right? Whether we're practicing mindfulness or not. And so, no guilt. That's the first thing that I try to imbue to anyone that I share this message with, because a lot of times when parents come for support, they're feeling like a huge level of guilt because their interactions with their child have had a lot of friction, right? There maybe is a lot of yelling. There's just a lot of disconnect. People aren't understanding each other. And it just feels like a lot of contention almost constantly. And parents are feeling a level of helplessness because they don't have the practice, dialed in themselves. And so they're having a hard time teaching it and don't feel able and ready to teach it, but recognize that it could be beneficial for them and their child. Right. And so a lot of times as parents, we're just busy, right? We're running around, we're trying to do the best for our kids in all the ways that we can, while also, building in relaxation and time to just take a break, and building in mindfulness can feel overwhelming. And so a lot of times parents don't start because it feels like one more thing they have to learn and add, and it just is too much. And I know that, and I felt that too as a parent. We went through a time when we had a loss in our family. And so we were trying to navigate big emotions on top of just living life, right? And life is hard enough without, challenging situations coming your way. And so a lot of times that overwhelm keeps parents from kind of engaging with it and trusting that the process will unfold if you just put one tiny step, ahead of the next one. And so I encourage parents to just start, right? Wherever you are, just start. And then the way that I work with parents usually is by supporting the child through like a one-on-one session, while also giving the parent a lot of tools and resources in terms of like emails or my podcast or just different resources I've created to help them build their own practice, right? While they're supporting their child. And you can do that on your own at any point, right? Build your practice and then just offer like the challenges of it to your kid, or what's going on, like, wow, I'm really feeling like it's hard to sit today. I can't sit and meditate for even 2 minutes. I tell parents, start with 2 minutes, just 2 minutes. And one of the things that really gets in the way for a lot of parents too, especially when we're talking about emotion, is a lack of kind of emotional awareness in themselves. And I know I was like that too, until I had to really dive into some challenging moments where I had to really get clear on my emotions because I was drowning in them. I had to, like I just kind of was aware of emotion, but I didn't have a level of connection with my own emotion that would allow me to identify, process, and move through it. And so one of the things parents can start to do is just acknowledge an emotion. Like, oh, I see you are feeling so joyful right now as you play with that new toy. I love seeing that much joy on your face. And then just sit in what joy feels like. And then in the hard moments, in the challenging emotions that we sometimes want to shove away, like if we're feeling anger or frustration, or a child's having a meltdown because they're feeling like a lack of control, then we sit in that moment and we say, this is what parenting looks like today. This is really challenging. I'm feeling frustrated. And we identify for our child, it looks like you're feeling so angry because you wanted to go outside and I asked you to do the dishes.
You just brought me back to the early days of parenting where I remember myself saying, use your words and don't just grunt and, have body language. But there is that important part about connecting your emotions to words that actually come out of your mouth, expressing those emotions. And many times we ask that from our kids, but if we're not practicing it, how can they learn that, and what does that look like to them? So yeah, what you just mentioned is a huge gem about, number one, making sure that you start today, you just take small steps and have faith in the process. because many times when you make the right decision, it makes the next part easier. And oftentimes when we are feeling overwhelmed, like we talked about the challenge of it, and it's like yet another thing to do. Well, if you take that first step, then everything else that in your life becomes that much easier. You invest in your children, everything else as they grow becomes easier and more like automated in their development, right? So very big ones. And then this one about talking and making sure that the parents actually go ahead and exercise this first, acknowledging it and then addressing it even in themselves so that the kids can see what it looks like to do it for others, what it looks like to do it for yourself. So wonderful, wonderful. Very cool. What else? These are really cool stuff. We should hear this more often.
I'm glad it's useful. I think that a lot of parents, when they connect with it, they're like, can it be that easy? Just naming what emotion my child is feeling. But if you think about it, when kids are little, and even we as adults, sometimes we need to kind of talk through something to figure out what on earth it is that is going through us.
Right.
And so kids have so many emotions they're trying to put a name to, that just giving them a simple label helps so much. So yeah, you brought that up and it's great. One of the things that I also love is this idea of, I call it an empathy flashlight. So when I work with kids, I'll have like a little finger light and we'll each have our empathy flashlight. And there are some kids who have a tendency, right, to just wear their heart on their sleeve, and they have empathy for everyone and everything, right? And some of us as adults are like that. Our heart just goes out to everything. And so there are different ways we use our empathy flashlight. For those kids and those adults, the idea is to be using your flashlight as a tool and to turn it on and to remember to turn it off sometimes. So you're not in like empathy overload, right? So when we work with kids, we'll say like, okay, you were having an argument with your sister and it seems like you were both feeling very strongly about what was going on. Can we get out our empathy flashlights and see what happened? And again, you're not going to do this right in the thick of the argument, right? You're going to wait like a couple of hours till everybody's kind of settled down. And then you're going to say, let's take out our empathy flashlights and see what was going on. Let's point the empathy flashlight at you first. So again, I have literal lights that I use for this. And we'll say, what were you feeling? What were you going through at that time? And then they'll say, well, I was really sad because I wanted to play together, but then she took the toy and I didn't know what to do, or, sometimes we might have to guide them through. But a lot of times if we give kids a chance to articulate, they kind of know what happened, So then we say, okay, can you turn your empathy flashlight onto your sister? And what do you think your sister was doing? Why do you think she wanted that toy? And then when they've had some space to kind of come down from the conflict, sometimes they can see, and they oftentimes know, they'll say, well, I think she was playing with it before I was. And so she thought I took it from her, but really she took it from me, but she thought that it was her turn still, And so then you say, oh, those are such great observations. You really understood what happened here. What do you think we could do to make it right? Or what do you think we could do next time to help us have more communication around what's going on? And then we give them like the tools and the process that they can engage with in the future, instead of like punishing them for an emotion or just leaving them to kind of sort through it on their own, which, I mean, we all do that at times, right? It's no judgment. But if we can just kind of guide them through the interaction using simple tools, like really having a flashlight handy and say, like, it looks like maybe it's time to get out the empathy flashlight. What was going on here? You can have everyone take turns, and shine it in different directions. You can also say, could we shine it on me for a minute? Because one thing that happens when you guys fight is it makes me so sad, because I love you both so much that when you are arguing with each other, it really hurts my heart. And it makes me feel like I just want you to be kind to each other for how much, I love you. And just, you can articulate everyone's perspective, which helps them sort of broaden their view. And then, like you alluded to earlier, as they build relationships more independently of our support and influence, we've given them the tools, right? Like they can articulate their own experience, their own emotions, and their own, like perspective, while also taking the perspective of someone else, which is what's going to enable them to build healthy relationships and cultivate empathy throughout their life.
That's amazing stuff, and fun too. I like it. I want to go home and play now. All right, Lindsay. So this is really cool stuff. And I know that our audience are eager and thirsty for more. human interaction is a very complex
Yes.
situation, and we need all the help we can get. So how can people learn more about you and what you do and connect with you?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I have a podcast called Thestressnanny where I share different interviews with experts, and I also share different meditations. I have an Instagram feed called at Thestressnanny where I share some of these tools that I teach children in my private sessions. I want to make them as accessible as possible for anyone. I'm working on an app, but it's not quite ready yet. I also have my website, www.thestressnanny.com, where you can go for information, some of these different tools that I share, giving you, ways to use them, and just simple stories to introduce your family to the idea of mindfulness, because I find that when families can just start to thread it into their conversations, they really can, with ease, develop a culture of mindfulness in their family because they could have a shared story around it. And, as humans, we love a good story and we can connect to it metaphorically, even as little kids, like that idea of the thought river. And so on my channels, that's kind of the kind of content that I share to help families just start to build it into the conversation and not make it this really structured, complicated thing that they build into their, family culture, but just like a small thread of resilience that they can start to weave in everywhere.
Okay, that's awesome. I'll make sure that I put all the links and in the description box just below the video. So guys, definitely check Lindsay out, and by clicking in the description and the links that are included over there, take advantage of the gift that she has for you. Very powerful stuff. And if you haven't already done so, make sure you click subscribe so that you can go ahead and see and be notified of the future experts and the message and the gifts that they bring to our show, and you'll be notified of those as well. Lindsay, thank you so much for being here and taking time out of your busy schedule to be here with us today. Any final words of wisdom before we part?
Well, thanks again for having me. This has been so fun. I would just encourage parents to approach mindfulness with an attitude of curiosity. We in our brains, we can't have fear and curiosity coexist. They're not complementary states. And so a lot of times we can get overwhelmed and afraid. We can worry we're messing up. We can worry we're messing up our kids. That's constant. And so if we can start to just get curious about how mindfulness might help, curious about how we might start to weave it in, we can help ourselves kind of take that first step, like you mentioned earlier, and overcome that initial inertia to just get going with the practice and start to playfully build it in wherever we can.
Right. Beautiful and powerfully said. I really appreciate it. Nice. Thank you. Fear and curiosity cannot coexist. I like that. All right, guys. Thank you so much. We'll see you around. And I look forward to further collaborating with you, Lindsay. Cheers.
Bye-bye. Thank you.